Hello everybody. I'd like to start this video first by thanking those of you who are considerate and kind in your communications with me. I know how frustrating it can get when a tool or technique doesn't work in Maya or other software. I really appreciate it when people don't take those frustrations out on me. So for this example, I'm going to select some faces on this sphere here. Deselect those behind that I accidentally selected. And I'm going to do an extrude. So I will go to my modeling toolkit, extrude, and I'm going to pull out the extrude on the blue arrow. In other words, its Z-axis. Now notice when I do this extrude that I get this pop-up here. With this pop-up, I can change some of the parameters of the extrude itself. For instance, we can add divisions to our extrude if we want. We can also click on the Keep Faces Together, which is currently set to on, but if we turn it off, we get this. Each one of these faces is a separate extrude. Now, what if we don't get this pop-up? How are we going to do an extrude and tell it not to keep faces together? Well, we'll take a look at that now. I'm going to create another sphere. But before that, I'm going to come over here to Display, Heads-Up Display, and I'm going to turn off this here, the in view editors. That's what the pop-up is that allows us to make our extrude either keep faces together or, in this case, not keep faces together. So I'm going to uncheck that and we'll go through the process again of extruding some faces. So I'm going to once again go to Extrude, pull it out on the Z axis, and you'll notice that this time, because I told Maya not to use it, we don't get that pop-up anymore that allows us to take this extrude and change some of the parameters of it. We can, however, still do these operations, and I'm going to show you how we can do that now. The first way I'm going to demonstrate is by going to my channel box, which is typically found here. Currently, I'm already in my inputs, actually, and this is where I need to make the change. But I'm going to deselect this. I'll show you first. Here's where I can make that change. It's right here. Keep faces together. And as you can see, it's currently turned to on. But if I come over here and instead type a 0 for off, the faces are now each one of those faces is its own separate extrude. If I come here and turn it back on by typing 1, then once again we have told it to keep faces together. Notice that I can also increase the divisions here still, and we have a number of other channels as well that we can also work with our extrudes. Let's take a look at that one more time. I'm currently in component mode here. I'm going to deselect and I'm going to go into object mode. Actually, I'll deselect the sphere. We can select it again. I select it. In my channel box, found here generally, we have our inputs, and under our inputs you'll see that there's an input called Poly Extrude Face 2. If I select that, I have all those properties here in my channel box, And I can either come in here and add divisions to that extrude, or we can tell it to not keep faces together. Let's take a look at yet a third way that we can change this setting for our extrude, a third place where we can change the setting. So I'm going to this time go to my attribute editor. The attribute editor can be found generally here. And if I click on the attribute editor, we'll see the attributes for the object that I currently have selected. What you should notice is that there are actually a number of different tabs here. One of these tabs is called Poly Extrude Face 2. If I select that tab, we can find a property here. In fact, here it is right here, where it says keep faces together, and it's unchecked. If we check it, we're now keeping faces together again on that extrude. And while we're in here in the attribute editor, let's take a look at that other property. Divisions, currently set to 1. Notice that we can change that as well in the attribute editor. Let's go through this one more time. So I'm going to select some other faces on my sphere. And we'll do yet another extrude. Before I do this, I'm going to go back and turn on the in-view editors. Typically, Maya will have that set so that it will automatically open up these in-view editors, but as you can see, you can turn that off. If you've turned it off by accident or for whatever reason the in-view editors have been turned off, remember, you can turn them back on by going to Display, Heads Up Display, and then checking the in-view editors. Now, once again, I'm going to go to my modeling toolkit and I'm going to do an extrude. I'll pull out the extrude and notice what I have here. And I can tell it either to not keep faces together, turning keep faces together off, in other words, so that we get, in this case, 9 separate extrudes, or we can turn it back on. Or, if we prefer, we can go to the channel box. And under the inputs, Poly Extrude Face 3 this time, because this is a different Poly Extrude Face operation than these other two that we did earlier, I can come over here and I can also turn off Keep Faces Together here by typing 0 in that field, or to turn it back on by typing 1. Again, remember that that channel is found here under, in this case, the Poly Extrude Face 3, Keep Faces Together. Now, if I go to my object mode, I deselect, I select. To get to that operation, I would need to come over to my inputs, found here in the channel box, select Poly Extrude Face 3, and find where it says Keep Faces Together, where I can turn it on or I can turn it off. Or, if I prefer, the third option is to go to the attribute editor, find the appropriate tab. You must have your object selected to see the attributes of that object in your attribute editor. But then, when you find the appropriate tab here, In this case, it's going to be this one, the Extrude Phase 3. This one is my previous one. I want to be in this tab. I'll uncheck Keep Faces Together, and now we get 9 separate extrudes. It's no longer keeping faces together. Now, what if you don't have your attribute editor there? And what if you don't have your channel box either? Now you can see, because I've torn them off and I've closed them, we no longer have the channel box or the attribute editor over here. But that's not a big problem, because we can go to Windows, General Editors, Channel Box, and we can open up the channel box that way. And we can simply drag it and dock it over here. We can do the same for our attribute editor. We can go to Windows, General Editors, Attribute Editor. And our attribute editor will pop up, and if we wish to, we can drag it over here, and we can dock it over here again if that's what we want. In addition, if you don't have your attribute editor, and you don't want to go all the way over here to Windows, General Editors, Attribute Editor to open it up, you can simply type Control A, and your attribute editor will pop up. I'll go ahead and dock it once again. A couple other pieces of advice. Remember that Maya keeps a history of these objects. So, if we go to our channel box and we look at our inputs here, you'll see that we have our Poly Extrude Phase 3. That was this extrude here. We also have our Poly Extrude Phase 2, which is this extrude here. I do not recommend going back in history and changing settings. After I've done this extrude, it's generally not a good idea to come back and adjust this extrude by adding divisions or by telling it to keep faces together, that kind of thing. In fact, let's see what happens if I change that. It might work, it probably won't. I'm going to try to change the divisions on this extrude here. And surprisingly, it works just fine, but don't rely on that. Do not count on that because you may end up having unpredictable results. The way to work with these extrudes and to work with the divisions and the keep faces together is to do the extrude and then set the divisions and tell it to either keep faces together or not, but make that decision right after having done your extrude. And yet another piece of advice. Again, we have this history on the object. If I delete history, which I'm going to do now, and I'm going to do that by going to Edit, Delete by Type, History, that will get rid of all of that history there, meaning that I cannot come back to this extrude and toggle it between keep faces together and not keeping faces together. I can't go back and add those divisions to it any longer because I no longer have a history here. A couple other words of advice if you have trouble finding some of the tools in Maya. In the upper right corner, you have your workspace. Currently, I have mine set to Maya Classic. However, I can change it by going to Maya Standard, Modeling Expert, and so on and so on. As you can see, there are lots of different options. If you want to see what I'm seeing on my computer, then you need to change your workspace to Maya Classic. That way you'll find all of these different windows and menu sets as you see on my screen now. In addition, remember, and we've already taken a look at this, we took a look at the channel box and the attribute editor. You saw that I tore them off of the shelf here, or off this where they're docked over here on the side. I closed them, and you saw that to reopen them, I could come over here to Windows, where we have our general editors. There are a lot of them. We have our modeling editors found here. We have animation editors found here. There's a lot of different menus. If you can't find something, look for it. Look for it by going to Windows and seeing if you can find it over here. Yet another thing that you can do if your screen looks different than mine and you're having trouble finding any tools is resetting. I'm going to close all of these editors that we have here on the side here. And what I'm going to do is once again come over here to Workspace, go to the drop down, and I'm going to say Reset Current Workspace. And look at that. It returned back to more or less the default workspace, back with the default menus and options here. And yet another thing that you can try if you have any problems with Maya not working like you expect or like you see in some tutorial of mine or someone else's tutorial is you can go to Windows, Settings Preferences, and you can go to Edit, Restore Default Settings. That may also fix some of the problems that you are having. And finally, yet another way that you can access much of these menu sets and windows in Maya is by holding down your space bar. Notice that if I tap my space bar, I can switch from view to view. But if I press down on my space bar and hold it, I actually get a lot of these very same selections as you see up here in our user interface. For instance, I can still come over here to Windows. Instead of accessing it from here, I can come over at the top up here. I can come here to Windows and open up my any of these editors I want, like the attribute editor. I already have that open, but we can switch over to our content browser if we want, or any other window that we desire. So I hope that this video has been helpful for you, and I wish everyone a non-frustrating experience with Autodesk Maya.